A glass of ice-cold water splashed across the face of the black security guard, dripping down his uniform as laughter echoed through the marble halls of the VIP terminal. "Maybe now you'll look clean enough to be here," the well-dressed passenger jeered, while others watched in silence, complicit in their stillness. No one moved to help. No one questioned why a man was being humiliated simply for standing where they believed he didn't belong. But what they didn't know, what none of them could even imagine, was that the man they tried to shame wasn't just a guard. He carried a past, a truth so powerful it would bring this entire hall of privilege crashing down. If you believe dignity should never depend on skin color, stay with us. Like this video if the story moves you, subscribe to Tell Me Soon. Which moment made you stop and think? And by the way, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to know your story too. Marcus Reed adjusted the cuffs of his crisp security uniform as he stood tall at the entrance of the exclusive VIP terminal, his eyes scanning the bustling crowd with calm professionalism. The late afternoon sun slanted through the massive glass panels, casting long beams of gold across the polished floors. Families bustled about, business travelers murmured into their phones, and airport carts. Marcus, it was just another day of maintaining order until they appeared. A commotion near the private entrance drew his attention. A sleek black town car screeched to a halt in the drop-off zone. From it emerged Ethan Walsh, a broad-shouldered man in an expensive tailored suit, exiting arrogance with every step. His wife Claire followed close behind, immaculate in their designer dress, her face set in an expression of disdainful impatience. Without even glancing at the checkpoint where Marcus stood, they made a beeline toward the VIP lounge, Ethan dragging a leather duffel behind him. "Excuse me, sir," Marcus said politely, stepping forward, his hand lightly resting on the velvet rope. "May I see your boarding passes, please?" Ethan didn't slow down. Instead, he walked straight into Marcus, bumping him hard with his shoulder. "Out of my way," Ethan snapped, his voice loud enough to turn a few heads nearby. "You think you're somebody because you wear a little badge." Marcus stiffened, maintaining his composure. His training screamed at him to de-escalate, to remain calm. "Sir, I'm going to have to insist. Everyone needs to present their credentials before entering the lounge." Ethan turned fully now, facing Marcus with a sneer curling his lip. "Listen here, boy," he spat, voice dripping with condescension. "People like you should know your place." Claire, standing slightly behind her husband, added in a saccharine, sweet voice. "Honestly, it's appalling the kind of people they put at the front now. Lowering the standards just to tick some diversity box, I suppose." Marcus said nothing, swallowing the insult as he had done 1,000 times before in his life. His father's words echoed in his mind. Dignity is not something you let others take from you. It's something you carry inside. Ethan, not satisfied with verbal abuse, raised his hand and pushed Marcus squarely in the chest, forcing him to take a step back. Around them, a few passengers paused to watch, their eyes darting between Marcus and the well-dressed couple, weighing the situation but saying nothing. "Do you know who I am?" Ethan barked. "You think your little security jacket means you can talk to me like that? You're nothing but furniture around here." Marcus clenched his fists suddenly by his sides but did not retaliate. "Sir," he repeated, his voice clipped with restraint, "please present your boarding passes or return to the public area." Claire gave a dramatic sigh and looked around as if seeking backup from the other VIP passengers. Seeing none, she flipped open her crocodile skin clutch and dramatically pulled out a business card. She shoved it toward Marcus without even meeting his eyes. "Get your manager," she said sharply. "Now, before this becomes a real problem for you." Marcus took the card without flinching, noting the embossed gold letters, Claire Walsh, Senior VP, Walsh International Holdings. He tucked it neatly into his pocket. "Right away, ma'am," he said, and clicked his radio to call for Mr. Patel, the floor manager. Within moments, Mr. Patel, a compact man in his 50s with thinning hair and a permanent look of harried exhaustion, arrived at the scene. "What's the issue here?" he asked Marcus quickly but without much real curiosity. He already sensed the politics in the air. Claire was quick to step forward, smoothing her expression into something wounded and affronted. "This man," she gestured at Marcus with disgust, "physically blocked my husband, treated us like criminals and delayed us unnecessarily. We are VIP travelers. This is unacceptable. I demand he be removed immediately." Ethan crossed his arms, smirking as he watched the situation tilt in his favor. Mr. Patel hesitated, glancing at Marcus, whose jaw was set but who remained silent, offering no defense. The manager knew the complaints of influential passengers could ripple upward quickly, jeopardizing more than just one man's shift. It could damage the airport's elite image. "Marcus," Mr. Patel said, his voice low and apologetic, "maybe it's best you step aside for now. Let me handle this." Marcus hesitated for a beat, his pride warring with his discipline, then nodded once. "Understood, sir," he said stiffly, stepping back from the entrance. Ethan and Claire sailed past him without a second glance, their heels clicking arrogantly against the marble floor as they disappeared into the VIP lounge, leaving behind a silence more cutting than any words could have been. Marcus stood there for a long moment, the velvet rope fluttering lightly across his shoulders. He said nothing, he did nothing. But deep inside, something shifted, and when the time came, Marcus Reed would remember exactly how this moment felt, and so would they. Marcus remained standing at the edge of the VIP entrance, his posture rigid, his face carefully blank, as he watched Ethan and Claire sweep past him with an air of smug victory. Mr. Patel mumbled a few quick words about handling the situation before he too disappeared into the lounge, leaving Marcus alone in the marble-floored corridor, exposed under the critical gaze of onlookers, each second weighing down on him like a physical force. His heart pounded with the sting of humiliation, but he kept it tightly locked inside, presenting the stoic exterior that had carried him through wars far graver than this petty injustice. He could endure this. He had endured far worse. Yet fate seemed determined to push him further today. The heavy glass doors to the VIP lounge swung open again, and out stormed Ethan, his expensive shoes clicking sharply against the polished floor. Claire followed, her phone already poised in her perfectly manicured hand, ready to capture whatever came next. Ethan stopped a few feet from Marcus, squaring his shoulders with the theatrical flair of a man used to having the world bend to his will. "You think stepping aside was enough?" Ethan said, his voice loud and imperious, drawing the attention of even more passers-by. "You embarrassed me and my wife. You think you can just walk away after that?" Marcus stood firm, hands clasped behind his back in a posture that betrayed no emotion. Sir, my job is to enforce protocol equally for all passengers," he said evenly. There was no intent to cause offense. Ethan laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "No intent?" he sneered. "You people are all the same. Pretend respect, but the moment you get a little authority, you forget your place." Claire moved closer, angling herself to get the best view, her phone camera suddenly activated, recording every second. "I think an apology is in order," Ethan continued, voice rising. "A real apology, and not just words. Actions speak louder, don't they?" For a heartbeat, Marcus said nothing, simply meeting Ethan's gaze with a steady calm that only seemed to inflame the man further. Ethan stepped into Marcus's personal space, jabbing a finger into his chest. "On your knees," he growled under his breath, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. "Right here, in front of everyone. Show them you know your place." A low murmur ran through the nearby crowd, a few gasps of disbelief, a few hurried whispers, but no one intervened. No one stepped forward. They simply watched, some with curiosity, others with poorly concealed excitement at the unfolding scene. Marcus's jaw tightened imperceptibly. His instincts screamed against it, every fiber of his being rebelled against the idea. But years of training and survival whispered something more pragmatic. Survive this moment, live for the next one. Slowly, mechanically, Marcus lowered himself to one knee on the cold marble floor, feeling its chill seep into his skin through the fabric of his uniform. Ethan grinned wide, a victor relishing the spoils of a petty battle, and barked, "Both knees." The second knee hit the floor with a muted thud, and for the first time in over a decade since the brutal days in hostile territories halfway across the world, Marcus Reed found himself kneeling before a man not out of necessity, but out of forced humiliation. "Now say it," Ethan demanded, folding his arms triumphantly across his chest. Marcus raised his chin slightly, his voice low but carrying across the growing silence around them. "I apologize," he said, each word carefully measured, "for disturbing distinguished guests such as yourself." Ethan's grin faltered, unsatisfied. "Not good enough," he snapped. "Say it properly. Say, 'I'm sorry for bothering you, dear white guests.'" For a moment Marcus thought he might refuse, might rise up right there and walk away, consequences be damned. But the faces around him watching, judging, enjoying, burned into his mind like brands, and something deep and cold within him settled into resolve. His voice, when it came, was stripped of all emotion, almost clinical. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, forcing the vile words out through clenched teeth, "for bothering you, dear white guests." Claire let out a peal of delighted laughter and stepped forward to step a series of photos with her phone, capturing Marcus at his lowest, her eyes glittering with mean-spirited glee. Ethan nodded in satisfaction, then turned theatrically to the watching crowd. "Let this be a lesson," he said, his voice carrying smugly through the down. They thought they had broken him. They had no idea what they had awakened. Finally, Ethan turned back toward the VIP lounge, tossing over his shoulder, "You can get up now if you think you've learned something." Marcus did not move immediately. He stayed kneeling for one more heartbeat, then another, gathering himself like a storm tightening at its center, before slowly pushing to his feet with a smooth, unhurried grace that felt almost like defiance. He brushed off the creases in his uniform, straightened his spine, and looked Ethan dead in the eye. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Ethan smirked, misreading the quiet steel in Marcus's gaze, and sauntered back into the VIP lounge, Claire practically floating beside him, victorious. Marcus turned away slowly, his steps deliberate, refusing to let the eyes boring into his back bend him further. Around him, the crowd dispersed in uneasy silence, pretending not to have seen, pretending the ugliness of what had transpired did not concern them. Marcus walked toward the edge of the terminal, his mind already calculating, already preparing. This would not be the end, not by a long shot. Marcus made his way toward the security office, each step heavy with the weight of humiliation he refused to show. His hands remained steady at his sides, but his mind churned with the injustice that had unfolded only moments ago. Every muscle in his body screamed for action, for retaliation, but he forced himself to remain composed. That was what they expected after all, wasn't it? They expected him to lose control so they could say, "See, he's just another angry man." No, Marcus would not give them that satisfaction. As he approached the glass-walled office, tucked behind the VIP checkpoint, he saw Mr. Patel pacing inside, phone pressed tightly to his ear. The manager's face was pale and drawn, beads of sweat glistening along his hairline despite the icy blast of the door, until Patel noticed him, flinching slightly before waving him inside with a tight, impatient gesture. Ending the call with a snap of his phone, Patel turned to Marcus, not meeting his eyes. "Marcus," he began, voice low and hurried, "I'm afraid there's been a development." Marcus said nothing, merely lifted an eyebrow in silent question. Patel shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his tie as if it were suddenly choking him. "Mr. and Mrs. Walsh have lodged a formal complaint," he continued, wringing his eyes. "They are extremely upset by what transpired earlier. Very influential people, Marcus. Very powerful. They've demanded action." Marcus clenched his jaw, the familiar bitterness of injustice rising in his throat. "Action?" he repeated, his tone carefully neutral. Patel nodded vigorously, still avoiding his gaze. "I have no choice," he said, almost pleading, "to protect the reputation of the terminal, to avoid escalation. I need you to step away from your post for the rest of your shift. Consider it administrative leave, with pay, of course. It's just temporary, just until things calm down." For a long, tense moment, Marcus said nothing. He stood there, a mountain of controlled fury, as Patel fidgeted and sweated and avoided looking directly at the man he was throwing under the bus. Finally, Marcus gave a short nod. "Understood," he said simply, his voice devoid of inflection. Good," he mumbled. "Just hand over your badge for now. Protocol, you know." Marcus removed the security badge clipped to his chest and placed it carefully on Patel's desk, his movements slow and deliberate, the soft clink of the metal against the wood sounding far louder than it should have. Without waiting for dismissal, Marcus turned on his heel and walked out, feeling the stares of his colleagues as he passed. Some looked away quickly, others offered pitying glances, but none said a word. As he stepped back into the main concourse, Marcus caught sight of Ethan and Claire seated comfortably in the VIP lounge behind the glass walls. Ethan spotted him too and smirked broadly, leaning close to Claire to whisper something that made her burst out laughing, covering her mouth demurely with one hand. Rage boiled under Marcus's skin, but he kept walking, forcing his breathing into a steady rhythm, refusing to give them even the smallest hint of satisfaction. He made it as far as the lower service hallway before he heard footsteps pounding behind him. Turning, he found himself face to face with Mr. Patel again, this time accompanied by 2 additional men, Assistant Manager Collins and a senior airline supervisor named Jensen. Patel's expression was grim, almost fearful. "Marcus," he said, his voice pitched low, urgent. "There's something else. I'm sorry." Marcus crossed his arms over his chest, waiting. Patel cleared his throat awkwardly. He said, the words tumbling out in a rush, "He insists that you've been involved in violent conduct before. He's demanding an immediate background check, for security reasons." Silence fell between them, heavy and stifling. Marcus stared at Patel, his face unreadable. A criminal record. Violent conduct. Lies. All of it. But the accusation was enough to trigger protocol, enough to justify deeper scrutiny. It didn't matter that his record was cleaner than any of the men standing before him. It didn't matter that he had served honorably in dangerous combat zones, decorated for his bravery, respected by generals. In this place, in this moment, a rich man's word outweighed decades of honor. "Standard procedure," Jensen added awkwardly, as if that somehow made the demand less insulting. Marcus said nothing. What could he say? Protesting would only make him look defensive. Arguing would only play into the narrative they had already begun to spin. Instead, he nodded once, curtly, keeping his boiling fury locked deep inside. "Fine," he said. Patel looked almost grateful for his compliance. Good, he stammered. "We'll expedite the check. Shouldn't take long." He offered a weak smile that faded quickly when Marcus said nothing in return. Jensen and Collins shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to be anywhere else but standing in judgment of a man they all knew had done nothing wrong. Marcus remained still as they processed the necessary paperwork, providing fingerprints again, answering rote questions with mechanical precision. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed incessantly, filling the sterile room with an oppressive hum. When it was finally over, Patel extended a hand in a gesture that might have been meant as conciliatory, but Marcus simply stared at it until Patel let it fall limply to his side. Without another word, Marcus turned and left the office. His body moved through the motions automatically, but his mind was already elsewhere, spinning, planning. They thought they had shamed him into submission. They thought administrative leave and a fabricated scandal would break him. They had no idea that Marcus Reed had endured worse humiliations in deserts halfway around the world, had faced death more times than he cared to count, and had always risen again. He exited through the staff doors into the main concourse once more, blinking against the sudden brightness. Passengers bustled around him, oblivious to the storm gathering just a few feet beyond their field of vision. Somewhere in the VIP lounge, no doubt, Ethan and Claire were celebrating their temporary victory, convinced they had put a black man back in his place. Marcus's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile, not quite a grimace. Let them enjoy their moment. Let them believe they had won. It wouldn't last. Marcus moved mechanically through the crowded terminal, his mind racing even as his body betrayed no emotion. The administrative leave weighed heavily in his pocket like a scarlet letter pinned to his chest. Around him, the world moved on without notice. Children laughing, couples arguing about gate changes, business travelers tapping furiously at their phones. None of them knew what had just transpired behind the sterile walls of the staff corridor. None of them cared. He drifted toward the auxiliary staff area, near the edge of the VIP checkpoint, where he could at least be close enough to watch, to see if Ethan or Claire made another move. His instincts warned him they would not be content with what they had already done. And sure enough, like a dark storm cloud rolling back into view, Ethan emerged from the VIP lounge, a drink in hand, his expression smug. Claire followed, still cradling her phone as if it were a weapon, her lips curled into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They spotted Marcus immediately, and the smirk that spread across Ethan's face was pure provocation. Ethan veered toward him without hesitation, closing the distance with long, confident strides. Well, you said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Look who's still hanging around. Thought they'd have sent the janitor home by now. Marcus said nothing, folding his arms across his broad chest and fixing Ethan with a calm, steady gaze. Silence was his shield. Ethan snorted and took a sip of his drink, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his next words hitting harder than any physical blow. "Face it," Ethan sneered. "Your kind will never be anything more than floor sweepers and toilet scrubbers. That's all you're good for. Maybe we should get you a mop. Make yourself useful around here." A few bystanders looked up from their seats, sensing the tension, but quickly looked away again, unwilling to involve themselves. Claire tittered softly beside her husband, her laughter light and cruel. Marcus's jaw tightened, his fists curling briefly at his sides before he forced himself to relax. He knew better. He knew the trap when he saw it. One outburst and they'd have all the justification they needed to ruin him entirely. Ethan, however, was just getting started. He took another step closer, invading Marcus's personal space, the smell of expensive whiskey clinging to his breath. "Tell me something, security boy," Ethan drawled. "How long did it take you to learn to say yes sir and no ma'am without choking on your pride? Or did they beat that into you back wherever you grew up?" Claire laughed again, louder this time, clearly enjoying the show. Marcus stared straight ahead, refusing to flinch, refusing to give Ethan even an inch. But Claire wasn't finished either. Stepping casually closer, she slipped her sleek designer purse off her shoulder, fiddling with it theatrically. She leaned toward a nearby counter, pretending to adjust her shoe, and with a slight flick of her wrist, let her purse slide deliberately to the ground beside Marcus's feet. "Oh," she gasped, loud enough for everyone within a 20-foot radius to hear. "My purse. Where? Oh, there it is." She straightened up dramatically, eyes wide, scanning around before her gaze landed squarely on Marcus. "You," she exclaimed, voice laced with false horror. "You were standing right there. Did you take something from my purse?" Heads turned. A murmur rippled through the immediate vicinity. Marcus stood frozen, incredulous at the sheer brazenness of the setup. Claire clutched the purse to her chest, visibly inspecting it as she exaggerated her search, pulling out her wallet, her passport, a scattering of makeup products. "It's all here," she said finally, her tone just shy of disappointment. This time. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder soothingly, though his smirk belied the fake concern on his face. "It's okay, baby," he said, loud enough for their audience to hear. "We can't be too careful these days. You never know who's lurking around, waiting for a chance to snatch something." His gaze flicked meaningfully to Marcus as he said it. A few of the nearby passengers began whispering to each other, their eyes darting toward Marcus with suspicion now, their faces tightening into masks of polite disdain. Marcus felt the full weight of their stares pressing down on him, 1,000 silent accusations hanging in the air. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to breathe evenly, to stand his ground. He could almost feel the narrative crystallizing around him, one he had no part in creating but which he could not escape. Guilty without cause, condemned without proof. Ethan chuckled quietly, clapping Marcus mockingly on the shoulder as he passed. "Careful there, buddy," he said, voice thick with false camaraderie. "Wouldn't want to add petty theft to that criminal record, right?" Claire giggled behind her hand, tossing Marcus one final triumphant glance before following her husband back toward the lounge. Marcus remained motionless, feeling the gazes burning into his back like hot coals. He stared down at the gleaming floor, at the reflection of himself distorted by the polished marble. A man bent but not broken, shamed but not defeated. This was not just about pride anymore. This was about survival, about dignity, about the thin, brittle line between injustice endured and justice demanded. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus turned away from the crowd and walked toward the maintenance corridor, his boots striking the floor with a measured, powerful rhythm. Each step echoed with silent promises. Each step is a reminder they would not get away with this forever. Marcus disappeared into the maintenance corridor, his heart pounding like a drum in a vast, hollow cave. Every insult, every pointed finger, every manufactured lie replayed in his mind in vivid, painful detail. He leaned against the cold concrete wall, closing his eyes for a moment, forcing his breathing to slow, to center himself, to resist the fury threatening to boil over. If he lost control now, they would win. Entirely, he could not afford that. He had survived battlefields with less mercury than this place offered, and he had learned that patience was a weapon, sharper than any blade. After a few minutes, he pushed himself upright and made his way back toward the public concourse, head high, movements deliberate. He could not return to his post officially, not under administrative leave, but a part of him refused to slink away, to hide as if he were guilty. If he was going to be punished unjustly, then he would at least meet it head-on, face forward. As he stepped back into view of the VIP lounge, he caught sight of Ethan and Claire once more, seated at a corner table sipping from delicate crystal glasses. They spotted him almost instantly, and Ethan's expression twisted into something ugly and predatory, like a lion spotting a wounded gazelle. With slow deliberation, Ethan rose from his seat, took up his drink, a tall glass filled with ice and amber liquid, and sauntered toward Marcus, a lazy grin spreading across his face. Claire watched with gleeful anticipation, her phone in hand, the lens pointed discreetly at the unfolding scene. Ethan stopped just a few feet away from Marcus, close enough that the pungent mix of whiskey and arrogance clung to the air between them. For a moment they simply stared at each other, the tension thick enough to slice with a knife. Then, with an almost casual flick of his wrist, Ethan threw the contents of his glass directly into Marcus's face. The cold liquid hit him with a force that startled even Marcus, dripping down his cheeks, soaking into his uniform, leaving sticky trails that clung to his skin like accusations. Gasps erupted from the nearby passengers, assuming whether to intervene, but quickly settled back down, content to watch the humiliation unfold. Ethan laughed, a low, mean sound. Maybe this'll wash off some of that dirt. BTAG, you're making the whole terminal look dirty. Marcus stood absolutely still, the cold liquor dripping from his chin onto the polished floor. His fists clenched so tightly at his sides that the knuckles turned white. But he did not move. Not yet. Ethan tossed the empty glass carelessly onto a nearby table, the sharp clatter echoing like a gunshot in the air. Claire snapped several pictures in rapid succession, her eyes glittering with cruel satisfaction. Well, you should keep it. Authentic. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose, blinking liquid from his eyes, forcing his body into a state of mechanical calm. He would not react. He would not give them that. Not here. Not now. Mr. Patel, alerted by the sated mask of frazzled panic. He took one look at Marcus, dripping and stoic, and then at Ethan, smug and unrepentant, and the calculation was instantaneous. Patel's gaze flicked around, noting the gathering crowd, the murmurs spreading like wildfire through the Colonel. He needed this to end, and quickly, before it spiraled beyond containment. He straightened his tie, wiped the sweat from his upper lip, and approached with a pained expression. Marcus, he said, voice tight with barely concealed anxiety, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the VIP area immediately. Marcus said nothing, only stared at him with those steady, inscrutable eyes. Patel shifted uncomfortably. Effective immediately, he clarified. You are banned from any further assignment or access to this section of the terminal. He glanced apologetically around the gathering spectators, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. It's for everyone's comfort, Marcus. You understand. Claire let out a soft, triumphant sigh, slipping her phone back into her handbag as if the matter were already concluded. Ethan crossed his arms, a victorious smirk playing across his lips, basking in the destruction he had orchestrated. Marcus slowly reached up and wiped the dripping liquor from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. He glanced at Patel, who flinched under the weight of that silent gaze, and then passed him to Ethan and Claire, whose laughter now seemed to echo unnaturally loud in the cavernous terminal. Passengers shifted awkwardly, some pretending to scroll through their phones, others watching openly, waiting to see if Marcus would snap, would lash out, and would fulfill the ugly stereotype they so desperately wanted to believe. But Marcus only nodded once, a short, sharp movement of acceptance, not of guilt, but of understanding. Understanding exactly what kind of game this was, understanding how deep the rot ran. Without a word, he turned and began walking away, his wet boots leaving faint tracks on the marble floor behind him, like a trail of wounded pride. Ethan chuckled, clapping his hands together once, twice, as if dismissing a performance that had finally ended to his satisfaction. Patel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, signaling frantically for the nearby janitorial crew to clean up the mess before it marred the pristine image of the VIP area any further. As Marcus passed the crowd, he caught brief flashes of faces, some sympathetic, some indifferent, most simply relieved they were not the ones under scrutiny. He walked with purpose, each step a silent testament that though they could strip him of his post, his uniform, and his privileges, they could not strip him of his will. Deep inside, something hardened, cooled to a razor's edge. He would not forget this day. Nor would he forgive it. Marcus walked away from the scene with heavy steps, each stride measured, each breath controlled, his mind simmering with quiet fury and wounded pride. The sticky remnants of Ethan's drink clung to his uniform and his skin, a tangible reminder of the degradation he had been forced to endure. Yet Marcus moved with the deliberate calm of a man who refused to break in public. As he disappeared deeper into the maze of the airport's staff corridors, the buzz of the terminal faded behind him, replaced by the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the distant clatter of maintenance carts. He knew without being told that news of the incident would already be spreading through the security team like wildfire. Carried on whispered words and fearful glances, Marcus headed for the security briefing room, a small, windowless space lined with lockers and old filing cabinets, where off-duty guards gathered between shifts. As he entered, the conversation inside stopped abruptly. The room was filled with familiar faces of men and women he had worked alongside for years. But now, every pair of eyes dropped to the floor, to phones, to invisible spots on the wall. The silence was deafening. Marcus stood for a moment just inside the door, feeling the chill of isolation settle over him like a second skin. He could almost hear the unspoken words hanging in the stale air. Don't get involved. Don't risk it. He nodded once to no one in particular and crossed the room to his locker. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Officer Ramirez, who had once joked with Marcus every morning over coffee, kept his head buried in his phone, pretending not to see him. Marcus opened his locker, methodically retrieving his personal effects. A half-read paperback novel, a clean uniform shirt, a worn photo of his mother tucked into the corner. He packed them into his duffel with mechanical precision, each movement a careful assertion of dignity. As he zipped the bag shut, a shadow fell across the floor beside him. He looked up to find Patel standing there, flanked by two members of HR he barely recognized. Patel's face was a careful mask of regret and administrative coldness. "Marcus," Patel said, voice stiff with officialdom, "we need to discuss your reassignment." Marcus shouldered his duffel slowly, turning to face him. He said nothing, simply waited. Patel cleared his throat, glanced briefly at the HR reps as if seeking their silent approval, then continued. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of all VIP security duties." He paused, perhaps expecting some reaction, but Marcus gave none. Specifically, Zone D freight loading and waste management. The words hung between them, heavier than any blow. The auxiliary cargo wing was infamous among airport staff. It was a sprawling, grimy section near the runways, where broken equipment, delayed shipments, and forgotten cargo were sent to rot. It was thankless, grueling work under brutal conditions, the kind of assignment given to employees they wanted to drive out without firing outright. "It's temporary," Patel added weakly, but no one in the room believed that. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, but he nodded once, a crisp, military movement. "When do I start?" he asked quietly. Patel hesitated, then said, "Now." He turned on his heel and walked out, the HR reps trailing after him, leaving Marcus alone once more in the buzzing, lifeless room. Marcus exhaled slowly, shouldering his bag, and left without a backward glance. As he moved through the corridors toward the service elevators, he passed groups of employees huddled in corners, their conversations dying mid-sentence as he approached. Some offered brief nods of acknowledgement, others turned their backs entirely, desperate to avoid being seen with him. Fear ruled the staff now. Fear of guilt by association, fear of offending powerful clients, fear of jeopardizing their own fragile positions. Marcus understood. He didn't blame them, but he would not forget. He reached the service elevator and pressed the button. As he waited, he caught sight of his reflection in the polished steel doors, the damp stains on his uniform, the bruises of humiliation darkening around his. Yet what he saw most clearly was not defeat. It was resolve. The elevator dinged and he stepped inside, descending into the bowels of the airport. Zone D was exactly as he remembered it from the occasional training drills offered by cavernous, poorly lit, smelling faintly of oil and decay. The floor was slick with grime, and the air was heavy with the metallic tang of machinery. Workers moved like ghosts through the space, heads down, shoulders hunched, performing their thankless tasks with mechanical precision. A surly supervisor with a clipboard met Marcus as he stepped out of the elevator. He gave Marcus a cursory glance, noting the soaked, rumpled uniform but saying nothing about it. "You're on loading dock 3, the supervisor barked. "Freight in, garbage out. You screw up, you clean it with your own hands. Got it?" Marcus nodded once. "Good. Follow me." They moved through the maze of pallets and dumpsters, the clang of cargo containers punctuating the silence. Marcus was handed a battered old reflective vest and a pair of stained work gloves. The message clear. He was no longer seen as a security professional, no longer a guardian of the airport's elite spaces. Here, he was just another invisible laborer, disposable and forgotten. The shift dragged on, hours blending into a monotonous haze of heavy lifting, grime, and the dull ache of bruised dignity. No one spoke to him unless necessary. No one offered a helping hand. If a crate was too heavy, he bore it alone. If a spill needed mopping, he did it without assistance. His muscles burned with exhaustion, but he welcomed the pain. It kept his mind sharp, focused. It reminded him of who he was and who they. As the shift finally wound down, Marcus stood at the edge of the loading dock, staring out into the night where the blinking lights of aircraft moved like distant stars across the runways. Somewhere above him, the terminal still bustled with life, with luxury, with the lie of civility. Somewhere up there, Ethan and Claire still believed they had won. Marcus smiled faintly, the expression sharp and dangerous. They had no idea how wrong they were. Marcus stood silently at the edge of the freight dock, the harsh night air cutting through the thin fabric of his stained uniform, the distant roar of departing planes vibrating underfoot. The metallic stench of oil and sweat clung to the atmosphere, but Marcus barely noticed it. His mind was elsewhere, sharp and cold, counting the hours, waiting for the moment he knew was coming. He did not have to wait long. Heavy footsteps echoed down the concrete hallway behind him, growing louder with each passing second. Marcus turned slowly, unsurprised to find 2 airport security officers approaching, their faces set with grim determination. Between them walked a man in a dark blue tactical jacket, bearing the insignia of the Airport Authority Police, Agent Lawson. Marcus recognized him immediately, even after all these years. The sharp, hawk-like eyes, the stiff gait favoring the left knee, the clean-shaven face that tried and failed to conceal a permanent wariness. Lawson had not changed much since the day Marcus had last seen him, terrified, bloodied, trapped behind a wall of shattered glass and twisted steel during the hostage crisis at Terminal 9. But Lawson showed no sign of recognition now as he approached, holding a thick folder in one hand, his other resting casually on the sidearm at his belt. "Marcus Reed?" he called out, his voice brisk and official. Marcus nodded once, steady and silent. "You're being detained for questioning," Lawson continued. "Allegations have been made against you regarding theft, misconduct, and breach of professional conduct. We need you to come with us immediately." Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't protest. Instead, he calmly reached into the inner pocket of his damp, grimy uniform, pulling out a worn leather wallet with smooth, deliberate movements. From it, he extracted a battered ID card, the laminate edges frayed with age, the lettering still sharp and proud. Special Tactics Unit, United States Air Force. Beneath the bold title was his full name, his rank, and a designation few civilians would ever recognize but which any law enforcement officer worth his badge would never forget. Marcus held the card between 2 fingers and extended it silently toward Lawson. The agent hesitated, frowning slightly before taking it. His eyes dropped to the card, then he froze. For a moment, everything around them, the clatter of machinery, the low hum of conversation, even the cold night wind seemed to. Lawson's fingers tightened involuntarily around the ID. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. Slowly, as if dragged by some invisible force, his gaze lifted from the card to Marcus's face. Recognition slammed into him like a tidal wave. The memory was vivid, seared into his bones, the choking smoke, the sharp crack of gunfire, fear clawing at his chest as masked men dragged hostages into a barricaded lounge. He remembered the flash of movement, the precision of the takedown, the firm hands dragging him to safety even as chaos erupted all around. He remembered Marcus's face, the same calm, unshakable resolve etched into his features now. Marcus Reed was the man who had saved his life. Lawson took a half step back, his mouth working silently. The two junior officers beside him glanced at each other in confusion, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere but unable to decipher it. Marcus said nothing, merely standing there with the quiet patience of a man who knew exactly what power he now held. Lawson inhaled sharply, gathering himself, struggling to reconcile the man before him with the accusations he had been sent to act upon. He glanced down again at the ID, reading the commendations listed along the bottom: Medal of Valor, Distinguished Service Cross, Presidential Unit Citation. These were not the honors of a criminal or a troublemaker. These were the marks of a hero. Lawson's hand dropped away from his weapon. He straightened his spine almost unconsciously, a gesture of respect ingrained deeper than thought. "Mr. Reed," he said, voice lower, tinged now with something that might have been awe or shame. I had no idea." Marcus met his gaze steadily, neither forgiving nor accusing, merely waiting. "I was there," Lawson said in a rush. The word Terminal 9, 6 years ago. I was one of the hostages." One of the officers shifted uneasily, clearly struggling to follow the sudden change in tone. Lawson turned sharply to them, his voice snapping with authority. "Stand down, now." The officers hesitated for a fraction of a second before backing off, uncertain, back to Marcus, his face flushed with conflicting emotions. "Sir," he said finally, the words slipping out naturally, instinctively. "There must be some mistake." "I didn't know." Marcus raised one hand, cutting him off gently but firmly. He did not need apologies. Not yet. What he needed was action. Lawson understood. He tucked the ID carefully back into Marcus's hand, as if returning something sacred. "You have my word," Lawson said quietly. "This ends now. We'll take care of it." From the corner of his eye, Marcus saw movement. Ethan, standing smugly at the railing above, watching the scene unfold. Claire perched beside him like a vulture ready to dive. They couldn't hear the words, but they could see the shift in body language, and confusion flickered across Ethan's face. "Good." Marcus tucked his ID back into his pocket and gave a barely perceptible nod. The tide was turning. Finally, Lawson took a steadying breath, the gravity of the moment anchoring his actions. His mind raced through protocols and procedures, but this time there would be no deference to status, no favors granted because of privilege or pedigree. This time, justice would cut cleanly, without fear or favor. He turned to his officers, his voice crisp and commanding. "Secure the Walshes," he ordered. "Escort them to holding for questioning regarding harassment, attempted defamation, and abuse of authority within a restricted zone." The officers blinked in shock for a fraction of a second, before nodding sharply and moving swiftly toward the upper mezzanine, where Ethan and Claire stood frozen in disbelief. Ethan, sensing the sudden change in momentum, straightened and barked a laugh, the sound hollow and strained. "You must be joking," he called out, his voice carrying a tremor of unease. "We're the victims here. He assaulted us." Lawson didn't even flinch. "You'll have the opportunity to make your statement during formal questioning," he replied coolly. "For now, you'll comply or face additional charges of resisting an investigation." Claire clutched Ethan's arm, her face paling. "You can't do this to us," she hissed, eyes darting around, searching for an ally but finding none. A few nearby travelers had begun to notice the scene unfolding, whispering among themselves, sensing the unmistakable scent of scandal brewing. The officers moved in, flanking Ethan and Claire, their presence a wall of silent authority that left no room for negotiation. Ethan tried to shrug them off at first, posturing with empty bravado, but it collapsed quickly under the weight of inevitability. Claire, too stunned to resist, allowed herself to be guided away, her perfect composure unraveling with every step. Marcus watched the scene with a stillness that bordered on serene. He made no move to intervene, no gesture of triumph. He simply observed, a quiet sentinel reclaiming the dignity that had been so viciously stripped from him. As Lawson approached Marcus once more, his expression was different now. There was no authority, no distance, only a deep, unspoken respect. "Mr. Reed," Lawson said, lowering his voice, "on behalf of the authority police and this airport, I offer my sincerest apologies. This never should have happened." Marcus inclined his head slightly, accepting the gesture but not lingering on it. Apologies were cheap when weighed against experience. What mattered was action, and Lawson, at least, was delivering that, "We'd like you to accompany me back to the VIP terminal," Lawson continued. "There are a few people who need to see you properly." Marcus hesitated only briefly before nodding. Together they moved through the terminal, cutting a path back toward the opulent lounge that had been the site of his humiliation. But this time, the energy around them was different. Staff members stepped aside respectfully. Passengers glanced up from their phones and conversations, sensing without fully understanding that the man walking beside the armed agent was not an accused criminal, but someone far greater. As they neared the glass doors of the VIP lounge, Marcus caught sight of Patel standing stiffly by the entrance. Twisting his hands nervously, his face blanched further when he saw Marcus approach, and he stumbled forward, words tumbling from his mouth. "Mr. Reed, please, I didn't realize I was following procedure. I was just trying to avoid any incidents." Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. Patel's own shame filled the silence between them far more effectively than any rebuke could have. Lawson cut in smoothly. "Mr. Patel, you will facilitate Mr. Reed's immediate reinstatement to his prior duties," he said in a tone that broke no argument. "Additionally, you will ensure he is accorded full honors and recognition for his service record, which, by the way, far exceeds the qualifications of anyone currently operating within this terminal, including yourself." Patel's mouth opened and closed like a stranded fish, but he managed a jerky nod. "Of course, Agent Lawson. Of course. Right away." As the glass doors swung open, Marcus stepped into the VIP lounge once more, but this time the atmosphere shifted palpably. The opulent space that had once seemed to close in around him now with suspicion or disdain, but with curiosity, with a dawning realization that something extraordinary was unfolding. A few guests rose to their feet instinctively, sensing the importance of the man before them. Others whispered hurriedly, fragments of overheard conversations floating through the air: military service, hostage rescue, Medal of Valor. Marcus ignored the buzz. He moved with quiet dignity to the center of the lounge, standing tall beneath the soft golden lights that had once illuminated his public humiliation. Lawson stepped forward again, clearing his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice resonant with authority, "I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Marcus Reed, decorated veteran, rescuer of 127 civilians during the Terminal 9 hostage crisis, a man who has risked his life for the safety and freedom of others." A hush fell over the crowd, the weight of Lawson's words sinking deep into the plush carpets and polished mahogany. Marcus stood motionless, letting the truth settle into the bones of the building, into the hearts of the witnesses who had once turned their backs on him. Patel scurried to Marcus's side, producing a fresh security badge emblazoned with the highest clearance level available. "Welcome back, sir," he meant, barely able to meet Marcus's eyes. Marcus accepted the badge without a word, pinning it to his uniform with slow, deliberate movements. It wasn't just a piece of plastic. It was the restoration of honor that had been wrongfully stripped away. As he turned to survey the room, he caught the eye of a few of the VIP travelers, some lowering their gazes in shame, others offering tentative nods of respect. He met each gaze evenly, making it clear that he remembered. He would always remember. Claire and Ethan, still visible through the glass wall of the holding area, watched helplessly as Marcus ascended to a place they could no longer reach, their smirks wiped clean by the cold hand of justice. Marcus's face remained impassive, but deep within him, a quiet fire burned bright and steady. The lounge settled into a stunned, reverent silence as Marcus pinned the new security badge to his chest, a symbol of honor and authority restored. For a long moment, the only sounds were the distant whir. Lawson remained nearby, standing at ease but clearly ready to act if needed, while Patel practically wrung his hands into knots, eager to avoid further disgrace in front of the growing crowd. Marcus moved with slow precision toward the central desk, where senior staff had gathered, their faces a study in nervous tension. Patel stepped forward, clearing his throat awkwardly in his grasp. "Mr. Reed," he began, voice thin and uncertain, "as per directives from the airport authority, immediate administrative action has been taken against Stephen Walsh and Mrs. Claire Walsh." Marcus remained silent, allowing the man to squirm a little longer under his unwavering gaze. "Effective immediately," Patel continued. Mr. Ethan Walsh has been banned from accessing any VIP services, lounges, or express privileges across all affiliated airports worldwide. His frequent flyer status, premium memberships, and associated privileges have been revoked permanently. A ripple of murmured shock ran through the assembled guests, many of whom understood just how devastating such a punishment would be to someone like Ethan. In elite social circles, access was everything. Without it, Ethan's influence would wither like a plant denied sunlight. Marcus allowed himself a slow breath, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. He had not sought vengeance, but justice had its own way of balancing the scales when the truth was allowed to surface. Patel fumbled with the papers, flipping to a second sheet. As for Mrs. Claire Walsh, he continued, beads of sweat glistening along his hairline. An administrative fine has been issued for violations under the anti-discrimination and harassment policy of the Airport Authority. She is further subject to mandatory corrective training and will be under probationary review for any future travel privileges. Marcus noticed the way Patel's voice tightened slightly when reading Claire's punishment, a subtle indication that, even now, some still struggled to reconcile the idea of holding the wealthy and well-connected accountable. But the record was clear. The proof irrefutable. Marcus said nothing, simply offering a small nod of acknowledgement. From his position near the holding area's glass walls, Ethan exploded in a loud tirade, his voice cutting across the lounge with the fury of a man realizing too late that his empire of entitlement was crumbling. "This is outrageous," Ethan bellowed, pounding a fist against the glass. "You can't do this. You don't know who I am. I will ruin you all." His threats rang hollow, brittle, and desperate. Security personnel closed in swiftly, ensuring he remained contained. Claire, standing a few feet away, looked less angry and more shell-shocked. Her perfectly curated composure was cracking visibly, her hands trembling as she clutched her designer handbag like a life raft. She stared at Marcus with wide, disbelieving eyes, as if still trying to understand how the man they had mocked and humiliated had risen to a height they could never reach. Lawson stepped forward then, his tone measured but carrying the weight of finality. "The penalties are final," he said, his voice carrying across the lounge with the authority of law. "There will be no appeals, no special favors. You are expected to comply fully or face further consequences under federal regulation." Ethan slumped visibly, the fight bleeding out of him as the reality settled like a stone in his gut. Claire said nothing, her head bowed slightly, her once proud shoulders sagging under the weight of humiliation and consequences. Marcus observed the scene quietly, feeling no triumph, only a deep, abiding sense of rightness. This wasn't about personal revenge. It was about setting a balance back into a world that had tilted too far into darkness, about proving that character still mattered, even when it seemed the world rewarded cruelty over decency. The formalities concluded, Patel gestured awkwardly toward a small podium that had been hastily set up near the center of the lounge. A few high-ranking airport officials, previously hidden in the background, now emerged. Their background, one of them, a stern woman in a navy blazer with the insignia of the National Airport Authority pinned to her lapel, stepped forward to address the room. "Today serves as a reminder," she said clearly, her gaze sweeping across the assembled faces, "that our commitment to dignity, respect, and justice extends to every individual, regardless of status or station. Let this moment stand as testament. No one is above accountability." A smattering of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then gaining momentum. It wasn't raucous, it wasn't jubilant, but it was genuine. Marcus remained still, accepting the moment with the quiet grace that had defined his every action up until now. His story wasn't one of loud victories or showy retributions. It was a story of resilience, of dignity earned and dignity reclaimed. As the applause faded, the atmosphere in the lounge shifted subtly. The disdain and suspicion that had once tainted the air like smoke were replaced by something else. An uneasy respect, a grudging admiration. No one dared meet his gaze for too long, but Marcus could feel the difference in how they carried themselves around him now, how they moved with a new deference born not of fear, but of recognition. Meanwhile, behind the glass, Ethan and Claire were led away by security, their departure a quiet punctuation mark on the end of their reign of entitlement. There would be no fanfare for their exit, no sympathy waiting for them outside the terminal walls, only consequences. The echo of Ethan and Claire's reluctant footsteps faded into the background as they were escorted away, leaving behind a lounge full of whispered conversations and sideways glances. Marcus remained standing for a few moments longer, letting the weight of everything that had unfolded sink deep into the marble floor beneath his boots. He had not asked for this reckoning, but now that it had come, he accepted it not with vengeance, but with the quiet, enduring strength that had always defined him. In the days that followed, the airport returned to its usual rhythms: flights boarding, announcements crackling over loudspeakers, travelers hurrying to gates with rolling luggage in tow. Yet beneath the surface, something had shifted. The staff moved with a new awareness, their greetings to Marcus tinged with a deeper respect, their avoidance replaced by tentative camaraderie. It was not sudden, nor was it absolute, but it was real. Word had spread quickly among the terminals that the man once scorned had faced injustice with a courage few could match, and the narrative had quietly rewritten itself, without the need for grand declaration. Marcus resumed his duties at the VIP checkpoint with calm authority, his presence a silent testament to resilience. He wore the new badge not as a trophy, but as a symbol of duty fulfilled, of integrity vindicated. Management made a visible effort to be more transparent. Policies were reviewed and training seminars on bias and discrimination were quietly added to the monthly schedule. It was a beginning, if not a full transformation, yet the true testament to change came not from memos or speeches, but from something far more personal. 3 weeks after the incident, as Marcus completed a routine perimeter check near Terminal B, he caught sight of 2 familiar figures clad in neon orange vests and navy blue jumpsuits, labeled Community Service Volunteer, Ethan and Claire Walsh. They moved slowly along the walkway adjacent to the parking structures, armed with trash pickers and large black garbage bags, collecting discarded coffee cups, candy wrappers, and forgotten boarding passes. The scene was almost surreal. Ethan, who had once lorded over the terminal like royalty, now stooping to pick up litter from the cracks in the concrete. Claire, whose manicured fingers had once gripped champagne flutes, now gripped a trash picker with obvious discomfort. Marcus stood at a distance, partially concealed behind a maintenance pillar, his arms crossed loosely over his chest as he observed them without malice, only measured curiosity. Ethan's movements were stiff, awkward at first, his face tight with resentment. Claire's expression flickered between embarrassment and anger, her cheeks flushed with the effort of the demeaning labor. For a while, Marcus thought they would treat the assignment like a punishment to be endured, going through the motions with gritted teeth and bitter hearts. But something unexpected happened. As the minutes stretched into hours, as the physical toil wore down their defenses and stripped away the last remnants of entitlement, a subtle change began to emerge. Claire paused beside an elderly janitor struggling to lift an overloaded trash bin. She hesitated only a moment before stepping forward and assisting without being asked, her movements clumsy but sincere. The janitor looked startled, then gave a small nod of thanks. Claire nodded back, murmuring something Marcus couldn't hear, but he saw the way her shoulders softened, the way she ducked her head slightly in acknowledgement. Not long after, Ethan approached a group of ground crew members stacking crates onto a loading dolly. Instead of barking orders or looking down on them, he bent to help lift a heavy box, grunting with the effort, wiping sweat from his brow like any other worker on the tarmac. One of the crew members clapped him on the back in rough camaraderie, and though Ethan winced at the contact, he managed a weak, sheepish smile. Later, Marcus watched as Claire, bending to pick up a crumpled fast food wrapper, accidentally knocked over a small child's suitcase. Instead of snapping or retreating, she knelt quickly, apologizing and helping the little girl retrieve her belongings with a genuine, unguarded kindness that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. From his vantage point, Marcus absorbed these small moments, each one a thread in a tapestry of slow, painful growth. They were not perfect, not by a long stretch. Their movements still carried remnants of pride, of discomfort, but they were learning, one humble gesture at a time, what it meant to be part of something greater than themselves. They were learning to respect the hands that built and maintained the world they once breathed through without a second thought. Marcus shifted his weight, feeling a strange, unexpected lightness in his chest. He had no illusions that a few hours of community service could erase the arrogance and cruelty they had displayed. But real change was not forged in grand gestures. It was built in these quiet, often painful moments of humility. Turning away from the scene, Marcus resumed his patrol with a slow, steady stride. He did not need thanks. He did not need apologies shouted from rooftops. What he needed, what he had always needed, was simply for the world to see him and others like him for who they truly were. Human beings deserving of dignity, of respect, of justice. As he disappeared into the ebb and flow of the airport crowds, Marcus Reed carried with him a victory far greater than headlines or medals. He carried the knowledge that he had stood firm in the face of injustice, and in doing so, had planted the seeds of transformation in even the most unlikely of hearts. And sometimes, he thought with a faint, almost imperceptible smile, that was enough. Before you go, if this story moved you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful narratives just like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Marcus's journey impacted you the most? Which moment made you stop and think? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from too. Your voice matters here. Let's keep these conversations going.